Are you considering getting on a GLP-1 agonist? On episode 706 of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet Dave Knapp and discuss his book, Decoding GLP-1, a guide for friends and family of those on the pen. Welcome to the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, the largest and longest running health and fitness podcast dedicated to people over 40. Whether you're looking to lose weight, get stronger, or improve your health and age better, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Coach Allan, an online health and fitness coach and author of The Wellness Roadmap. Each week, we dive into practical tips, expert advice, and inspiring stories to help you take control of your health and fitness. If you're ready to look, feel, and perform your best, no matter your age, this podcast is the perfect place to start. Let's get you on the path to a healthier, fitter, and more energetic version of yourself. I hope you'll join us each week, and together we can unlock your full potential. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast. I'm really glad you're here today. We've got an exciting episode talking about the GLP-1s. We've talked about it a few times on here, but I've brought on an expert that's actually been on these medications. So stay tuned. This is a really good book and a really good conversation. Can you believe it? We're already a week into August. I was looking at the calendar and the scheduling of this, and I was like, wow, we're already into August. This is kind of crazy. Time is flying this year. I'm still here in North Carolina plugging away. Actually, I think my sister could write a book on what not to do if you're going to hire an electrical or plumbing contractor. She's had the worst time trying to get into her new place. She cannot get her permits. She cannot get things done. And every time she sends an inspector down there, he finds something wrong. Typically the same thing that was wrong the last time he was there. But she can't catch a break right now. My brother and I have been trying to help her, but it has just been a mess. And every time it's like we think we're there and then we're not. So I'm just plugging along. I'm just gonna stick in and do my thing. I will say though, I am looking forward to September. I will probably still be here, but I am looking forward to September. Not necessarily the cold because it's going to start to cool off here, and I'm not really that happy about that. But it is what it is. But I am looking forward to September because I've got a few special things planned. Now on here, we're only talking about once a week, so you're gonna miss a lot of it as it's happening. But if you want to follow along on some of the stuff at real time, I'd encourage you to go to our group and join our group at Facebook. It's 40plusfitness.com/group. That'll take you to the Facebook group. Go in. There's a few questions for you to answer, request to join the group, and that's going to be where you can find out what's going on day to day with 40 Plus Fitness. Like I said, September is going to be a pretty exciting month for us, so I'm really looking forward to it. And I know you will too if you start seeing some of the things we're going to be doing. So you should join us out there, 40plusfitness.com/group. Our guest today is a leading voice in the GLP-1 medication community, known for his patient-centric approach to sharing information about weight loss, obesity, and type 2 diabetes. Through his platform on the pen, he has built a thriving community of over 100,000 individuals navigating their journey with GLP-1 medications. A social media influencer, podcaster, and content creator, he delivers timely, relatable, and deeply informed insights that resonate with patients. His work has been featured in Fortune, Bloomberg, Yahoo Finance, and Business Insider, solidifying his role as a trusted advocate and storyteller in the space. His ability to simplify complex topics while centering on patient experience has made him the go-to resource for anyone on or considering GLP-1 treatments. Whether through his engaging live shows, podcasts, or written work, his mission remains clear: to reduce stigma, educate, and empower individuals to reclaim their health. With no further ado, Here is David Knapp. David, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Thank you, Alan. It's good to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Now, I got into your book, and I'm one of the surprising trainers out there that when people start talking about GLP-1, I'm not the first person to just poo-poo the idea. Um, a lot of people expect that I would. It's like, oh, you just you train harder and you eat less, you're going to lose the weight. So
Yeah,
let's just do
it's
that.
pretty typical trainer disposition towards GLPs.
Right. And but I'm someone who's worked with enough people over a 10-year span here to know that this is not a simple calorie in, calorie out problem.
Mhm.
There's emotion involved, there's hormones involved, there's biological systems involved, there's just physical capacity limitations involved,
Right.
and yes, energy balance.
Yes.
But so it's not as simple. I can work your butt off hard enough to lose the weight if you'll just do what I say. Um, and so I know that there's a place for this
Mhm.
to help people. And when I see statistics like there are a billion obese people on this planet
Mhm.
today, half of Americans will be obese by 2035 or
Mhm.
2030. I forget the exact year, but that half, not overweight, but at the level of being obese, which I just again it floors me. Although I was in that camp at one time in my life,
Mhm.
so it shouldn't because I know how easy it is to get there, and how hard it is to come back.
Sure.
And I do think that these medications are a way to help a lot of people that otherwise would have their lives shortened by the diseases that come along with the same uh, symptoms. Same thing that causes obesity is effectively causing all of these other lifestyle diseases.
Right.
And so anything we can do to keep that from happening, I'm going to be on that side,
Yeah.
cheering
I
them
think
on.
that's the right side.
Yeah, and but there are people that are going to abuse it, and that's going to happen. And it's like, oh yeah, you got the actress that just wants to lose 5 pounds, and she does this, and then they're going to be asking a few years from now why she ballooned up another 20.
Mhm.
um, well, she didn't keep taking the stuff,
Yep.
so that there's a lot to it. But I kind of want to start out with your story because I think
Yeah.
you went. I'm gonna call it almost typical.
Mhm.
Almost the typical journey, and then just found yourself at that place. It's like I've got to do something, and what I've been doing isn't working. And I know Einstein is credited with saying, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome is a definition of insanity. They
Mhm.
actually interviewed him once, and he said he doesn't remember saying that, but it's true nonetheless. So I'm going to call it Einstein's confirmed understanding of the word insanity. You,
For
you
sure.
you you were getting tired of trying to do the same thing over and over. It worked a little bit when you were younger, and then you're getting a little older, and it stopped working.
Yep, exactly. So when I was about, I'd say about a senior in high school, that's when I really started to pack weight on, and it wasn't the first time that I noticed that my body was different than my peers. I definitely, as a younger man, carried a little bit extra. I never had the six pack. I always had, I was just a little extra, carried a little bit extra, and within my own personal family, that was kind of the norm, at least with my extended family. My immediate family, nobody struggles with obesity, but on either side of my family, aunts, uncles, grandparents, there's rampant obesity and type 2 diabetes, and even type 2 diabetes in people who aren't, morbidly obese. So it was the first time that I really felt compelled at that age to kind of like, hey, I don't want to be this size. I want to be fit. I want to be active. I want to grow to be healthy. And of course, in 2003, just like anybody who was dealing with anything uh, remotely close to excess weight, they were looking at the Atkins diet, and the Atkins diet was this sort of it was just really in the zeitgeist at the time. Carbs were the devil, carbs were the enemy. And so I jumped on that bandwagon. I was at about 225 pounds, so it was about my heaviest. I'm about 5'10, 5'11, kind of in between there. and so I, carry at 225 as a senior in high school. I was just starting to pack it on. And so I started this Atkins diet. I really was watching my carbohydrates, really bought into the science behind it, and really got aggressive with cardio. So I was running a couple of miles every day. I had a friend who had recently joined the military at that time. And so he would join me and we would just run. And so I ran off and carb excluded with my diet and really got my weight down quick. I got my weight down within a matter of months to about 175 pounds. So it was about a 50-pound weight loss. Um, the good news is that it worked in the short term. In the long term, it was a little bit harder to sustain. And so to kind of boil my story down into just a soundbite, I spent the next 17 years of my adult life chasing that same success with the Atkins diet. I would hit that low carb diet really hard for 3 to 4 months, maybe up to 6 months in a year, and I would drop, there was a waning effect. I never got back to that 50-pound weight loss, but I'd lose maybe 30 or 25. The problem is on the upswing for the following few months, I'd gain back that and more. And so it was a cycle of lose 25, gain 30 or 35, which ultimately led at age 37 years old to a type 2 diabetes diagnosis. And I weighed at that time 319 pounds. Now, from the year before, I knew something was wrong. I was doing the low carb, and I was really hitting it hard, and I was losing no weight. And I said to my wife, I said, I'm trying so hard. There's something that's not right with me. I didn't know what that thing was. And to be honest with you, type 2 diabetes was way off my radar at 37 years old. And especially as somebody who had, even though I struggled with obesity, I had the yo-yo and everything, I definitely was a carb-conscious person. And so I did not expect a type 2 diabetes diagnosis, but nonetheless, I was diagnosed. And my doctor looked at me and he said, Dave, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I don't want any drugs. And he said, well, Dave, what you got to do then is you got to jump in head first to the ketogenic diet. Here's a binder. Here's our program. We're going to get you on here, and we're going to get this weight down. And so I said to him at the time, Doc, I said, I don't think you understand the obesity side of my story. Like, I've been yo-yoing on this type of diet for nearly 20 years, all of my adult life, certainly. And nonetheless, I was committed to doing whatever my doctor thought it was going to take to reverse that type 2 diabetes. And so I ventured off on a year of full-throated keto exercise, the whole deal. By the end of that year, this is what's astounding. Like I said, I started at 319. By the end of that year, my weight was 312 pounds. I lost 7 pounds in 1 year on strict keto. My insulin levels were still off the charts. My A1C was corrected. My hemoglobin A1C, which for those who may not know what that is, that's basically like a 3-month rolling average they're able to take from your cells of what your blood sugars are doing, right? And you really don't want anything above about 5.7. That starts to get into prediabetes territory. I had gotten below that in a year on keto, but my insulin levels, and that's kind of the fallacy with type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance is, the wheels are already falling off when your insulin levels are high, right? You can keep your A1C low, but it might take somebody, this is a crude analogy, but it might take somebody a thimble full of insulin to keep that A1C low, and it might take somebody else a gallon of insulin to keep that level low. Again, a crude analogy, but it gives you the representation. If you have a ton of excess insulin floating around in your bloodstream, that creates a hormonal environment that is very difficult to achieve weight loss, because insulin's number one job is to store energy. And so if you've got an overabundance of this, it's very hard to lose weight. And perhaps an explanation for why my blood sugars were low, because I wasn't eating carbohydrates to spike it, but there was still all this excess insulin floating around in my bloodstream, making it a very difficult environment to lose weight. So 319 to 312 landed me in the doctor's office, and that is where I was introduced to the idea of either bariatric surgery to correct my issue, or this new class of medications that was, for some people, especially in non-diabetic people, starting to help people accomplish weight loss similar to bariatric surgery.
Yeah, and what's interesting about these medications is they shouldn't even really exist. Because because the half life on these like a GLP-1 in your system, because this is a natural part of our system.
Correct.
We create that hormone ourselves, but the half life of that hormone is so short
Mm-hmm.
that you would literally be taking shots of this like every couple hours just to get any kind of effect at all. But
Yeah.
they've managed to make these things a lot more effective, and the half life now as long as a week on some of them.
Yeah.
You used a word, okay, and again, I'm not totally up to speed on all of this stuff because it's changing every day. So I'll never
Absolutely.
be where you are in understanding all of it. But you use the term mimic incretin hormones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what is an incretin hormone, and when we do these, what we're doing with these drugs, what is actually happening there?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's at the heart of why they have identified obesity as a chronic relapsing disease, right? A lot of people struggle with that, or struggle with a disease that could be caused and perpetuated by behaviors, right? But let me get into the science a little bit here. So, incretin hormones or incretin hormones are hormones that your body produces in response to nutrient intake. So, in other words, you eat, your body, through the cells in your digestive tract, sense the nutrients that you eat, and then it releases certain hormones in response to those nutrients. And one of those class of hormones is incretin hormones. And underneath these hormones are about 7 or 8 different hormones, right? But the most prominent of these hormones is called GLP-1. And GLP-1, being the most prominent of the incretin hormones, is responsible for, among other things, stimulating the beta cells in your pancreas. That's what tells your body I need to release insulin because we've got sugar to deal with. So GLP-1 signals that, but it also goes up to the brain and works in many areas of the brain to signal satiety. In other words, we're gonna get the blood sugar under control by stimulating the beta cells. We're gonna tell the brain to stop bringing in glucose so that we can sort of manage this homeostasis. Now, without getting too down and dirty with the science, the natural enemy of incretin hormones is this enzyme that your gut produces called DPP4. And this is basically just a byproduct of your gut bacteria, your naturally occurring gut bacteria. But the problem with people who are diabetic specifically, and there are studies that back this up, is that the DPP4, which is a byproduct of, like I said, this gut bacteria, well, that gut bacteria is in orders of magnitude higher abundance in the guts of people who are type 2 diabetic and obese. And so they're producing an exorbitant amount of DPP4. This DPP4 is then destroying almost instantly these incretin hormones, right? Which, as you pointed out, have a very short half-life in our system, but are important for signaling some very critical things in terms of managing your metabolism. So what they did before they discovered GLP-1s to be so effective, at least analog GLP-1s, GLP-1 being the endogenous, your body creates it, and then analogs being the kind they come up with peptides and, like you said, make them last a week instead of just a couple of minutes. The DPP4 being run amok is just absolutely destroying these incretin hormones, and then it's not giving people with type 2 diabetes or obesity a real fighting chance at satiety, at good glucose control. And so they found a way to mimic this. But again, sort of going back to my previous thought, the DPP4 class of medications came before GLP-1s, and they basically just came up with drugs that killed off that DPP4 to help that endogenous production of GLP-1. But then they found these peptides that they could wrap in a fatty acid that mimicked and bound to the receptors the same way that the endogenous incretin hormones did, and that's where you get the current class of medications that we have.
Okay. Now you got into the history and it was I was like, oh my God, no one knows this. But well, you know it because you put it in your book. But this was not something that someone was just sitting in a lab trying to solve a problem. This was they found a chemical from a lizard
Yeah.
and
Now
it
I've
was
seen some
doing
wild
something.
I've seen some wild videos floating around online, like Ozempic is snake venom. There's a shade, just like everything crazy that you hear. There's a shade of truth to everything, and sort of how they came up with this is sort of wrapped up in lore, right? Because there's not any real history book that lays this out exactly how it happened. But there's this lizard in the Arizona desert that is called a Gila monster, and it does produce venom. And within that venom is a peptide that the scientists were looking at because it had this property of lowering blood sugar. And so what they did was they took the venom of the Gila monster and isolated this one peptide called exendin 4. Not really important, but it is when you consider the name of the drug that it created. So they isolated this peptide called exendin 4 and found a way to reproduce this peptide synthetically. So they reproduced this peptide synthetically. This created the first GLP-1. A lot of people say they don't know what the long-term effects of these drugs are. Actually, we've had these drugs around for over 20 years, and the first one we had was called Byetta. You can look that one up, but the active peptide, the active pharmaceutical ingredient in Byetta, is called exenatide. And so they isolated that peptide exendin 4 and then synthetically produced exenatide. And that was our first GLP-1 medication. It had a half-life that was much better than endogenous GLP-1. It mimicked it in our bodies, and it lasted for a few hours instead of a few minutes. And so this was really effective at helping people with high blood sugars bring down their blood sugar. So it was approved by the FDA, I believe, in the early 2000s for the treatment of type 2 diabetes, and people found it very helpful. And then sort of from there, we can, if you want to, we can get into the science of how they evolved it from there. But that is ultimately why we have the drugs today like we do. Mounjaro, Zepbound, Ozempic, Wegovy, these new era of medicines that have a half-life of a full week almost, that are used to both treat type 2 diabetes and obesity.
Yeah. I'd rather focus on the future than the past,
Yeah.
but I just thought that was an interesting factoid
Yeah. And I
for
appreciate the opportunity to set it straight because there's so much crazy stuff going around about on the internet. Ozempic, you're just injecting straight snake venom, and it's not true. First of all, it wasn't a snake. But anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to set that straight because it's wild.
yes. But I do want to jump in a little bit and talk about what these drugs actually do, because there's concepts like food noise, and you were talking about blood sugar, but they do quite a bit more than just create some satiety, slow
Right.
food digestion, and help our blood sugar.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up because just a couple of days ago, a crazy, interesting study was done. So what they did is they enrolled about 144 patients. At least 144 patients made it to the trial. They put them in three arms, right? So the first arm of the trial got placebo. The second arm got a drug called liraglutide, which was after exenatide and Byetta. Liraglutide was one of the next ones to make it to the market. It was a daily injection. I believe Byetta was twice daily, then liraglutide was once daily, and you see the evolution. So then the second arm got liraglutide, an older version, and then the third arm got Tirzepatide, which is the active ingredient in Zepbound and Mounjaro. That's the king of the hill right now. In this study, it was remarkable what they did. So they wanted to get to the bottom of what is happening beyond exactly what you laid out, beyond the stimulation of the beta cells, beyond the slowing of the digestion. What is it doing in the brain? And so what they had to do is they had to do MRIs on these patients. So they did some before and after MRIs before they got the drugs. And what they did is they exposed these people to images of highly densely caloric, highly palatable food. So think ice cream and French fries and pizza, like that kind of thing. They exposed them to these images, and then they watched before they received any drug, the way that their brains lit up on the MRI. And to make a very long story short, those using the current new generation of drug, Tirzepatide, watched a very meaningful dimming of those areas in the brain that responded positively to the imaging of the highly palatable food. So, to your point, there's something beyond what we've talked about that's happening in the brain to actually reduce what people have called food noise. They didn't really have a name to put to this idea of constant nagging hunger that just doesn't relent, even in the middle of oftentimes a meal where people are satiating themselves. They're taking in nutrients, but they're still obsessing about what am I going to eat later? When am I going to eat? Where am I going to go to eat? All of these questions just super, super loud. And people who take this medication who suffer from food noise often talk about a switch being flipped off. And what it turns out is they can actually watch that happen on a brain scan.
That's kind of interesting. I was on Twitter, X, the other day, and there was this woman, and she, you look at her, she's obese, and someone had told her something about Iran being bombed, and she's like, "Well, do they provide any of our food? What's this going to do to our food?"
Hmm.
And I'm thinking to myself, her brain is like the food noise is so loud for
Yeah.
her. The thought that her food would get cut off
Mm.
was actually terrifying to her.
Mm-hmm.
It's not logical, but
Right.
it was what it was. And not to make this political, but it's like when your brain can't function outside of the food noise, um, that's a pretty bad place to be.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people in our on the pen community will talk about the freedom that GLP-1s have given them in the sense that they feel like their mind has been freed up to focus on other things.
Absolutely. Um, so there are some top of the hills. They're developing all the time because again, from minutes to now days. But even within the current ones, there's different classes,
Hmm.
and some that they would say are better, or at least designed in a way that they're different, so that now there's choices. Can you talk a
Right.
little bit about the current choices, how
Yeah.
someone would go about understanding those?
Yeah, so starting on the timeline continuum of Byetta and Exenatide, which was the first one in about 2003 ish, what you have seen is basically just an improvement of GLP-1, that most prominent of the incretin hormones. You've just seen an improvement in the half-life. So whether you're talking about exenatide, after exenatide came liraglutide, which was the once daily, then Eli Lilly came out with a once weekly called Trulicity, dulaglutide, and then Novo Nordisk came out with Ozempic. And the Ozempic was the one that really broke through because although Trulicity was the first once weekly, Ozempic was the first once weekly that worked really well, not only in controlling A1C, but in helping to bring down weight. And so then you saw Ozempic was actually approved for weight loss. They actually approved liraglutide for weight loss too. It just wasn't super effective, but at the time it was the most effective thing they had, like 8 or 9% weight loss for non-diabetics. With Ozempic in non-diabetics, they found that they could get weight loss down to around 16% body weight loss in 68 weeks. So that was like the king of the hill. And then Eli Lilly had been quietly working on a dual agonist. So getting outside of the realm of just GLP-1 and saying, what can some of these other incretin hormones do? And so Mounjaro and Zepbound, the active ingredient is called Tirzepatide. Notice these all end in tide because they're all peptides. They're just peptides, long chains of amino acids, proteins that mimic our naturally occurring hormones. Uh, Tirzepatide is more of a GIP, stands for gastrointestinal polypeptide. Not super important, but because it's primarily a GIP, it is novel in its approach because it's not as much GLP-1 and it's focusing on this GIP. And it's really that GIP, like in that study that I told you about, where they looked at brain scans, that really quiets that food noise, really acts in the brain maybe a little bit differently than just straight GLP-1 does. And then looking towards the future, some of the next ones to hit the market will combine GLP-1 and other things. CagriSema will be the next one to hit the market, injectable from Novo Nordisk, which couples it with an amylin agonist. The science behind it's not super important, but it's co-secreted with insulin in the pancreas and helps to quiet food noise as well. And then a triple agonist coming probably 2027 from Eli Lilly, which is GLP-1, GIP, and then an axon glucagon, which the novel thing about Retatrutide is that Retatrutide actually gets out of everything that we've had up until now, focuses on reducing energy intake. And the magic of Retatrutide and the glucagon component is it revs up your metabolism and actually helps your body to burn fat in addition to just reducing caloric intake. So you can see the evolution of this stuff. And then I'm sure what you would be interested in knowing, and perhaps some of your audience would be interested in knowing, because one of the biggest knocks on these drugs, and maybe this was in your questions, but one of the biggest knocks on this drug is how do you bring the weight down without messing up your body composition, right? Because when we talk about rapid weight loss of any kind, whether you're using medical assistance or whether you're just calorically restricting, you worry about what your body composition is at the end of it. Your scale might go down, but how much of your percentage of your lean muscle tissue did you give up in the process? And the future beyond Retatrutide is coupling these drugs with myostatin inhibitors, which will actually help to not only preserve muscle mass during weight loss, but to help build muscle mass. So we're talking about a pretty wild future when it comes to what you can do medically to reverse, poor body composition.
Yeah. That's where the trainer in me will step up and say, okay, if you're eating less, you need to focus on getting adequate protein, and you need to be doing resistance training, doing some quick hit style training, interval training, and some long slow stuff. That's going to allow your body to primarily lose fat and
Mm-hmm.
mostly retain muscle, because it's really hard to build muscle on a calorie deficit, which is where you would be
Yeah.
on these drugs. But you can retain that muscle if you're doing resistance training and eating adequate protein.
And that is one of the things too that obviously the prescribing of these medications, I think it's super important to have good medical supervision, good dietary supervision, and then good counsel on exactly what you just said. Because again, anytime you put somebody in a caloric deficit, you run the risk of them losing this lean muscle tissue. And we're not even just talking about muscle. We could be talking about your heart. So going into a caloric deficit, and sometimes it can be quite extreme, is these medications are very powerful in some people. Not all people respond to these the same way, but which is why obviously there's a market for new ones and better ones. But for those who do respond very well to these medications, it's very hard for them to eat. So focusing on and prioritizing protein is extremely important for those people, as well as making sure that they're making steps using resistance training to preserve that muscle mass.
Yeah. You said something earlier. It was real quick, but I think this is important because I've looked at a lot of these studies and from your book and elsewhere, and they'll say, okay, yeah, you lose this percentage of your body fat or your body weight mass, and it's over. It's basically they'll list it out like for the sample size, it was 55 pounds or something like that. Like they
Mm-hmm.
lost 55 pounds in 68 months.
Right.
They lost 60 pounds in 72 months.
Mm-hmm.
These studies now have gone for longer periods of time. So there is a lot of data, which is really good good to have if you're going to start something like this. But we're not talking about losing all this weight in 30 days or even
Right.
90 days. This is when you're doing this is where you have to kind of put that hat on. You grind it out the keto diet for a year,
Yep.
but that's kind of where your head has to be. This is not a 1 year project. This is a lifestyle that I need to get into for a good long time to
Mm-hmm.
lose the weight that I need to lose.
Yeah, and it's important to note also that when you talk about, however many percentage points weight loss over however many months, these clinical trials are very tightly controlled. In both the select trials for Wegovy, the Surmount trials for Tirzepatide, Mounjaro and Zepbound, there was a protocol of diet and exercise that was adhered to during the clinical trial to achieve those results. So it wasn't just, hey, we're going to inject you with this and then you're going to lose weight. It was, people that achieved those results were also coupling that with lifestyle modifications. It's an important thing to note.
Yeah. Now, there was a period of time, okay, these things get really popular. Actresses are taking it, other people are taking it. A lot of money flowing into, I think that company is based in what, Norway or,
Hmm.
but a lot of money flowing uh,
Absolutely.
to these companies. And as a result, they couldn't keep up with demand.
Hmm.
And the folks that probably actually needed it the most were struggling the most to get it.
Mm.
Um, and so the compounders were able to step in and start making these peptides
Yeah.
and offering them. Again, the doctors are still making this prescription, but because you can't buy it otherwise, the compounders were stepping in. Can you talk about a little bit about these compounders? How would I know I'm working with a good one, and how do I know I'm getting what I actually pay for? Because you
Yeah.
see a lot of people selling peptides, and not for use in humans.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
So how do
Yeah.
I know
There's,
how?
I like, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this because I think this is one that deserves the most scrutiny right now and the most education, because it's everywhere. These drugs, the generic names, Tirzepatide, semaglutide, it's everywhere. Even once you watch or listen to this podcast, you're probably gonna get nailed with ads on Facebook and Instagram. So let me just real quickly lay out the continuum because it's definitely a spectrum of safety in my opinion. So this is one guy's opinion, but I will just say this one guy has followed this stuff obsessively for 3 years, probably more so than just about anybody in the world. And so when we talk about compounded medications, there are basically, or let's just talk about them in terms of non-branded medications. So we have the branded pens. I know that most people will be listening, but I'm holding up this old gumball jar, gumball machine that is full of spent GLP-1 pens. The kind that do not come in these pens, right? So you have, as you said, shortages of these medications where, believe it or not, compound pharmacies are able to acquire the active pharmaceutical ingredient and mass produce these things regardless of patent if the FDA has declared that those drugs are in an official shortage. And so for several years, both branded versions of semaglutide, Wegovy, and Ozempic, and branded versions of Tirzepatide, Mounjaro, and Zepbound were in massive shortages. In fact, in my own journey, I had to skip a lot of the incremental doses on my way up to the highest dose of Mounjaro because they just weren't available. Now, because the compounders were able to go around and mass produce this created a massive market for, telehealth companies to pop up and actually sell these compound versions to their patients and actually make money on it. Because doctors don't make money when they prescribe you a prescription drug. But if they're selling you a compounded medication from a pharmacy, that is largely outside of FDA regulation, right? At that point, the medications are not considered FDA. While they're allowed, they are not considered FDA approved. So let's talk about the spectrum. You have 503B pharmacies, which are considered outsourcing facilities. These are factories that do have some level of FDA oversight in terms of having to comply with something called the CGMP. It all relates back to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. But essentially, back in the early 2010s, politicians said, hey, all these drug companies are outsourcing all of our medicines to China and India. We ought to have some infrastructure to make that stuff on our own in case anything gets squirrely here on the geopolitical stage. And so they established 503B pharmacies, which are factories that can mass produce medicines even if they're under patent in times of FDA shortage. So that was allowed up until the shortage was ended. And the shortage was ended. There was lawsuits and everything. We covered all that on the pen like very closely. But those lawsuits effectively slammed the door on the mass-produced version. So everybody has now moved to the second. And I would say, 503Bs were the safest because you did have some level of FDA oversight. Now everything has moved to 503A pharmacies, custom doses and custom formulations. In other words, you can get from a compound pharmacy something that doesn't exist in the branded form. So a dose that doesn't exist in the branded form In Tirzepatide's case, you have it goes up by 2.5 milligrams, 2.5, 5, 7.5, 10, 12.5, 15. If you need something in between those doses, then a compound pharmacy can usurp the patent, make you let's say, a 3.2 milligram version. The other thing is custom formulations. If people have side effects, they can combine it with another peptide or another ingredient. Sometimes vitamins B12 is a common one for people who are suffering with like nausea or fatigue. They might add something who's, niacinamide is another popular one. Anyway, a custom formulation that obviously doesn't exist in the branded version for people who require that medically. Now, the compounders have used that as kind of a loophole to continue to mass produce these. But again, the 503A pharmacies don't have FDA oversight. 503A pharmacies are actually governed by their state pharmacy boards. So where 503Bs have some level of federal oversight, once you get into the 503As, you're kind of beholden to how good that state is at inspecting their pharmacies and holding them to high standards. And so it's important at that point that people are doing a little bit extra legwork and looking up on, where is the pharmacy at that my drug is coming from? What state is it in? Let's look up that pharmacy board. Let's see if there's any violations, what those violations were to determine how safe it is. And then way over here on the non-safe spectrum is this research grade for research purposes only, not for human consumption, which are sold directly to the consumer outside of any regulation, no doctors, no nothing. You buy something from a company, they say that it's, Tirzepatide or semaglutide. You get it in a powder form, you mix it with bacteriostatic water, and you just trust that what you're injecting is what they say that it is. And it's very, very, very sketchy. But because the compounds have been more scrutinized once the 503Bs ended and the shortages ended, a lot of people just went there immediately because the advertising for this stuff is crazy. I just spent 25 minutes on the phone or on the text message last night with somebody who messaged me, and they said, I'm microdosing Tirzepatide. I'm taking 25 micrograms. And I said, well, that's 1/100th of the dose. And she's like, well, I'm not losing any weight. And I'm like, that's 1/100th of the lowest dose, which wasn't even included in clinical trials. And she said, well, I mixed it with this much bacteriostatic water. And I said, okay, so you're not using brand drugs, you're using research grade. Turns out she was taking a full 2.5 milligrams. She had no idea. And so, but there's no doctor supervision. There's no, none of that's happening. So it's a very crazy world. So you do have this wide spectrum, and I appreciate the opportunity to educate people. And I would say run as far away as you can from that stuff that is research grade only, because even if they offer certificates of analysis, there's no way to know that that is linked to what you actually got or credible, or it's just very, very sketchy. And I would steer people far away from that option.
Yeah, well, as you might guess, someone that's in the health and fitness space, I actually see some of these ads myself quite often.
Yeah, it happens. It all proliferated because a lot of these companies sold for years steroids, stuff to help build muscle, stuff like that. And so there's a lot of people who are very comfortable in that world, and they did a hard juke to these peptides used for weight loss as soon as they became, a gold
Popular.
mine,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah. But the funny thing was, I saw one the other day, like, and we talked about this offline, was that it was drops, oral drops. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, now peptide is just a bunch of amino acids in a long chain, and that's going to hit stomach acid, and then it's just going to get broken into a whole bunch of amino acids
Yep.
that aren't going to be the peptide that you're dripping into your mouth.
Right.
Um, Now, maybe if it was sublingual, maybe you get some of it, but it just it's
It's
one of those. It
minimal.
seems too good to be true moments, and so I actually, what I do, I'm weird. I looked it up, and they had tablets. They did talk about tablets that are actually coming from like Eli Lilly. So I'm like, okay, so there isn't a way to take this orally, but again, I'm not sure the drops are the right delivery
Yeah. So
mechanism.
there's a new small molecule non-peptide oral coming out early 2026 from Eli Lilly. Um, but it's a small molecule. It's a non-peptide, so that's what makes it orally bioavailable. Now, Novo Nordisk has had an oral version of semaglutide called Rybelsus. So basically, Wegovy or Ozempic in a pill. But the reality, and I think we talked about this offline, the reality is Novo Nordisk paid $2 billion for the technology that they have been able to wrap that peptide in this pill. They paid $2 billion for that. That's not something compounders have access to, how to create that or do anything with that. So when you talk about taking, and I should also mention that Rybelsus, in order to get efficacy on par with the injectable, right? You have to take about 134 times the amount of pharmaceutical ingredient orally versus injectable per week. So not only like Rybelsus, you need 25 milligrams of that of semaglutide daily orally to get to the efficacy of the injectable, and none of the compounded versions even offer remotely that. It's just they offer typically the same dose as the injectable, and there's nothing wrapping that peptide to keep it safe. So you're getting nothing. You're paying several $100s for literally nothing.
That's what I figured.
Yeah.
Well, good. Thank you. Okay. Now, obviously, someone goes in, they know they're struggling, and they decide, okay, but I want to do this. I want to go ahead and do this. But there's sort of this stigma. I was looking at some various comments from people who were on them, and that was a lot of them overwhelmingly were talking about the stigma of being on the medication, like it makes you lesser of a person
Right.
to have to rely on something like this rather than gut it out, if
Yeah.
you will.
Yeah, the stigma around obesity and the shame around obesity are great because people often feel like failures. People like me who roller coastered for 17 years um, with their weight. Um, there's a lot of shame because you put that blame on yourself, even though much of what happening in your body at a certain point is outside of your control. That's why they call it a chronic relapsing disease, because even if you're able to fight against your broken biology, and it takes so much um, restriction and so much depriving of even just what I would call a normal amount of food, that people swing back the other direction very quickly. Your biology is working against you. So the shame and stigma is real. It's why I wrote the book, because once I got into creating content and building a community, what I found most remarkable was that most people wouldn't even share with their parents or as in some cases their own spouse, that they were on these medications because there was so much shame. And I thought, if we can just help people understand a little bit more about the biology around obesity as a disease and what these medications are actually doing to correct that, and what I always say is level the metabolic playing field, then I think there would be less shame in people feeling shame in talking about this, and ultimately more people getting the help that they need.
There's a billion obese people on this planet,
It's a
so
lot of people.
we need help. We need help. David, I define wellness as being the healthiest, fittest, and happiest you can be. What are three strategies or tactics to get and stay well?
What are three strategies and tactics to stay and get well? Well, I'll speak from somebody who's living with obesity and type 2 diabetes. I think the first strategy is involve a medical professional, somebody who has spent their whole life and not just a doctor, somebody who's spent their whole life understanding specifically what you are dealing with. And that I think is lost. I mean, some people just think all doctors are created equal. It's not the case. It's not the case. You need to find someone that specializes in what you're dealing with, because otherwise you're both sort of throwing spaghetti against the wall and trying to find something that sticks. So find a good medical professional, right? I think is the first key. The second key I would say is you have to find something that works for you. There's a no shortage of content creators and gurus and plans and programs that one could use, but at the end of the day, what you have to find is something that is a sustainable lifestyle for you and get you off that roller coaster of complete and utter deprivation. And so finding balance is a huge part of that piece of the puzzle as well. And I would say thirdly, on the topic of movement as well, so you have to find something sustainable from a diet perspective, but from a movement perspective, I believe the same thing. I think the more that you can incorporate things in your daily life that are functional, right? What do you love to do? What I love to do is I love to play baseball with my kids. I love to play football with my kids. I love to coach their teams. And so it's important to me when I am maybe have a stronger bent to be lazy or to not indulge in what they want to do, to just really buckle down and engage in that physical activity with my kids because I enjoy it, they enjoy it, it's rewarding. So the movement piece of it doesn't always have to be, in my opinion, this drudgery, right? You can find things that you enjoy doing, but that takes intent, right? You have to be intentional about it. So being intentional about the ways that you move, and starting to reverse this idea that everything has to be a punishment.
Great. Thank you. Now, David, if someone wanted to learn more about you, learn more about the podcast and your community on the pen, where would you like for me to send them?
Yeah, so a good hub to go to is onthepen.com. That's our website. It'd be a good gateway to about everything that we do. The podcast lives there. All of our YouTube stuff gets fed into there. So onthepen.com is a great place to start. We also, a lot of what we cover here at On the Pen is more about the news about these medications. I firmly believe that one of the most important things that people can do, we talked about finding a good doctor, a good provider, but one of the best things you can do is inform yourself and go into that conversation, that 15, 20 minutes you have in front of that doctor with as much information as you can be loaded with so that you can have more competent, confident conversations. And so one of the things we do is we cover all the news around these medications so that people are always on the up and up. They can go to obesity.news, just type that into your browser, obesity.news, and you'll get access to all of our news, and we'll get it straight to your inbox, your email inbox. So obesity.news is a great place to go as well.
Okay. Thank you, David. David, thank you for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness.
Allan, as a new, freshly 40-year-old man, I appreciate what you're doing, and thank you for having me, and thank you to your audience for giving us some time today.
If you enjoyed today's show, take a moment to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you would, please leave us a rating and review on your podcast player of choice. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet Dr. Nathan Bryan and discuss his book, The Secret of Nitric Oxide, Bringing the Science to Life. Until then, have a happy and healthy week.